The killer phrase was at the end when Kimmel said, "You just don't realize it." Because you see, he's smarter than you, and he needs you to know that. And his ego can't bear that there's someone out there more famous and more influential than him. I got news for you, Kimmel. The last time you mattered, Bruce Jenner still had a
million views. Whereas, as I point out, on ABC, a massive network that comes into your home for free, that you have to make no effort to find, at best, Jimmy Kimmel can get 1.5. He needs to have a little self-perspective before going out there and hurling these insults, because he looks a little...
Once upon a time in the quirky world of late-night television, Jimmy Kimmel was the lovable clown, tossing out dad jokes about burritos and gossiping about celebrities like it was all part of a harmless circus act. He was a guy who hosted keg stand contests with bikini models, the ultimate frat bro in a suit. But then, something changed. One day, he stared into his Hollywood mirror with unexpected seriousness and suddenly decided he was America's moral compass. Just like that, the class clown tried to become the class president. Gone were the beer, jokes, and goofy skits. In their place came solemn monologues and lectures on ethics. It was one of the strangest personality overhauls television had seen, like watching Mike Pence try stand-up comedy. And that, of course, is when Greg Gutfeld stepped into the spotlight.
Case in point, last night, all the other late-night hosts threw a hissy fit. It's too bad Tim Waltz is still leaving, or he could send them all a sack of industrial-strength tampons.
All know what they saw. They saw what we saw. Saw the frail elderly man who needed help getting off the stage. They're just too chicken shit to tell us about it, because they accurately deduce that he could still be the Democratic nominee, and they don't want to ding him up. Maybe you give Barbara a pass. Gives a damn what this singer saw or says. But you know what? Jimmy Kimmel happens to be employed at ABC, which happens to have a rather large news organization. And he has been one of President Trump's most vocal critics. Where are you, Jimmy? On vacation? Not good enough. You can still use your thumbs to send out a tweet. You could set the record straight right now.
The undisputed king of cable snark, Greg Gutfeld, riding a wave of ratings like it's a mechanical bull, fueled by so much razor-sharp sarcasm, even a cactus would feel self-conscious. But Gutfeld didn't just quietly observe Jimmy Kimmel's dramatic transformation. No, he grabbed a megaphone, whipped out a whiteboard, and maybe even fired off a glitter cannon just to highlight how wildly Kimmel had veered off the comedic track. What once was playful late-night humor had turned into a preachy detour, and Gutfeld wasn't about to let that slide unnoticed.
Jimmy, true, it was a terrible night for women, children, and for the hundreds of thousands of hard-working immigrants who cut his lawn.
Terrible night for women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go. For healthcare,
Gutfeld was rewriting the rulebook on late-night television. No jazz band, no canned applause, just bone-dry punchlines sharp enough to warrant a fire warning. While Kimmel stood solemnly behind velvet ropes woven from moral virtue, Gutfeld crashed the party in clown shoes, stomping right through the pretense with a grin and a middle finger for every Nielsen win. He didn't just challenge the format, he torched it. And as the ratings climbed, so did the heat. The roast was on, especially for anyone who dared vote against him. And guess what? The crowd was eating it up.
96th Academy Awards show, and while you might have missed it, there was one clear winner. No, not Oppenheimer. It was sanctimonious leftists for their lead role in pretending they are better than you. Winner number one, Jimmy Kimmel. For the fourth time, Kimmel hosted the Oscars before an adoring crowd of Hollywood stars who laughed and curried favor with the man who wore blackface sometimes. Yes, some of the very same celebrity who wanted you to believe they were horrified after yours truly said in 2018 that people used to don dark makeup in order to date well-known black celebrities and it wasn't a big deal. Absolutely ate up the performance by Hollywood darling Mr. Kimmel, whose blackface costume included his oft-repeated bit as basketball star Karl Malone.
Now, Karl Malone never seen no flying saucer himself, but if he do...
It's a familiar syndrome, one often seen in former shock jocks who suddenly grow a conscience, conveniently 3 Emmy nominations too late. The symptoms? Earnest lectures squeezed between limp punchlines and teary-eyed moments into cue cards, all disguised as satire. But then came the cure, relentless mockery. Gutfeld tore into Kimmel's new persona with the grace of a jackhammer in a library. This was the same guy who once staged fake twerking accidents for YouTube clout, now offering political wisdom like a Whole Foods cashier quoting a tweet they half-read. And if you're wondering whether Gutfeld came armed with receipts, he didn't just bring them, he wheeled in the whole file cabinet. Ratings, cringeworthy sketches, and aging clips from the man show that now play like a sun-baked jar of mayonnaise.
Everyone who voted against him, and guess what? It was a bad night for everyone who voted for him, too. You just don't realize it yet.
You know what? If I ever cry on TV, it'll be because Maroon 5 a new song. But that's it. You big. Now.
Gutfeld didn't merely critique Kimmel's comedy, he performed a full autopsy. The verdict? A once funny man now reciting punchlines that sound like they were ghost-ridden by a focus group at a DC think tank. And here's where things really got entertaining. While Greg Gutfeld wielded sarcasm like a surgeon's scalpel, Megyn Kelly entered the scene with all the subtlety of a flamethrower. Dressed like a courtroom assassin and sipping coffee with unnerving calm, she dismantled reputations the way most of us fumble through IKEA furniture. No manual, just precision. Where Gutfeld used a comedic chainsaw to hack away at Jimmy Kimmel's public image, Kelly slipped on surgical gloves and exposed every hypocritical cell of his carefully curated persona.
This past 2 weeks, they had the Kennedy Center honors the other night where Joe Biden couldn't say Dionne Warwick. He kept calling her Diane, and he didn't know who Barry Gibb was. He kept calling him Billy. You know who else was honored? At the Kennedy Center. You know who else? Billy Crystal. Just FYI, do you know who once opened up the Academy Awards in full blackface?
Oh,
Billy
yeah.
Crystal. Billy Crystal. And do you know who's going to be hosting the Academy Awards this year? Jimmy Kimmel. Do you know who's worn blackface repeatedly and spoken inner city sort of an accent saying she needs to darn those socks? Jimmy Kimmel as Oprah, as a fat-suited, black-faced darning.
No shouting, no dramatics, just cold, clinical takedown. She didn't just bring receipts. She filed them in alphabetical order under K for Kimmel, jokes that aged like milk. Let's rewind the tape, shall we? Remember the man show? That testosterone-soaked circus of bikini contests, beer guzzling, and punchlines that felt like they were sponsored by Axe body spray and unchecked male egos? That was Jimmy Kimmel, front and center, alongside Adam Carolla, turning frat boy antics into primetime content. The show's highlight reel was basically, here's some cleavage, here's a keg, here's Jimmy acting like a caveman in HD. And now, somehow, that same Jimmy has rebranded himself as America's moral authority, wagging his finger from a velvet throne built on self-righteousness and selective memory.
Kimmel is back on the air after taking the summer off. He's missed a lot. Kimmel says if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't get a hospital ICU bed. But I'm not sure if Jimmy was being sincere because he wasn't crying. Anyway, it's just funny hearing someone say, see you, who nobody actually sees. Oh. Look, I don't want to suggest that Kimmel's show has become boring and predictable, but last night during the taping, people in the studio audience were changing the channel.
Megyn Kelly, ever the prosecutorial sniper, didn't just point out Kimmel's transformation, she dismantled it with surgical precision. She reminded everyone that this is the same man who once thought peak comedy was convincing women to bounce on trampolines for the amusement of leering viewers, and now he wants to cancel people over decade-old tweets. The irony? Enough to power a small village. But she didn't stop there. Oh no. She went straight for the third rail of Kimmel's career, the infamous blackface sketch. Yes, that one. The internet hasn't forgotten, even if Jimmy would prefer we all come down with collective amnesia. He impersonated NBA star Karl Malone in full blackface and called it comedy. Back then, it aired on network television without a hint of outrage. Today, that same clip could ignite a congressional hearing.
Monday morning show with Stephanopoulos into the evening Academy Awards broadcast with Kimmel and ABC elevating, the blackface lovin' Kimmel. They, at the same time, fired Chris Harrison, host of The Bachelor, for trying to defend one contestant on, The Bachelorette, for saying, gee, I know I went to this antebellum party, a couple years ago. I guess I didn't see anything wrong with it. And all he said was, are we judging her by today's standards, or are we judging her by, old standards, whatever. He was basically trying to say we're being too hard on her. Got fired. Chris Harrison has to be fired by ABC. I don't know why, because he's not a leftist, because he's not out there more saying all the terrible things about Republicans that Jimmy Kimmel says. So this is saying, we get it, we're an ally. And I guess maybe they're trying to make up with their past, for their racist past, without ever...
Kelly didn't need to embellish. She simply held up the mirror and let the reflection do the damage. He used to be America's drunk uncle, she quipped. Now he wants to be its conscience. A line so sharp it didn't just sting, it echoed. And the brilliance. She delivered it with the cold detachment of a bored therapist reading your browser history, calm, clinical, devastating. Then came the piece de resistance, the miraculous rebrand of Jimmy Kimmel. From the guy who made fart jokes and wore blackface to the self-appointed guardian of truth, crusading against misinformation like he never had a past to erase. This is a man who once built his brand on exploiting stereotypes, now standing behind a podium preaching ethics, integrity, and justice, as if his past were a deleted browser history instead of a permanent tattoo etched across the face of the internet. Megyn Kelly dismantled this shiny new sanctimony with surgical precision.
Career peaked with busty girls on trampolines. The only boob we see is him. Once co-hosted The Man Show. Now he's sobbing like he just watched Steel Magnolias 3 days into his menstrual cycle.
She pointed to his recent crusade against misinformation, where Kimmel styled himself as the last beacon of intellectual rigor in late-night TV. The irony? He fact-checks others with the swagger of someone who's never bothered to fact-check himself, like a GPS confidently shouting, "Turn left," while steering straight off a cliff. Kimmel wants to correct the world, Kelly noted, but forgets to check the mirror. And it wasn't just sharp, it was systematic. She took apart Kimmel's so-called moral high ground like a flimsy IKEA coffee table, all glossy surface, no real structure, and definitely a few screws loose. She didn't just poke holes in his persona, she turned it into Swiss cheese, slapped on a sticky note, and sent it back marked return to sender. Because when your entire moral argument is built on the shaky scaffolding of a past you refuse to own, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing collapses. Kelly didn't just call it out. She underlined it in red ink and pinned it to the very forehead of late-night television. You remember Megyn Blonde, brilliant, and unofficially banned from Manhattan brunches for daring to have unapproved opinions. Her delivery wasn't loud, it was lethal. While Gutfeld chuckled at Kimmel's comedic collapse, Kelly handled it like a prosecutor presenting a case. No yelling, no theatrics, just a calm, calculated list delivered with the charm of a tax audit.
Worst. The Daily Show has the worst ratings. They only have 360,000 people watching that show. During the Jon Stewart years, it was 2 million. Now it's down to 300,000. Seth Meyers, absolutely dreadful. He doesn't even have 1 million, 778,000. I mean, for net television, this is, you don't have to pay for it. It's there when you turn on your TV, you plug it in. That's a droll number. Greg Gutfeld on cable, which you do pay for, it has more than double the numbers of Seth. Jimmy Kimmel, 1.5 million, also equally horrible.
One by one, she unearthed the sketches buried beneath Kimmel's current aura of moral superiority, late-night bits so edgy they once made Howard Stern wince, now quietly scrubbed from view in service of a desperate rebrand. Kelly didn't rely on punchlines. She brought receipts, cold, unflinching facts, and the most unsettling part? She was right. There's something almost poetic about watching a man who once made a living mocking pop culture now trying to position himself as its moral compass. According to Kelly, Kimmel hadn't evolved. He traded in self-awareness for self-righteousness, swapping punchlines for lectures, and hoping no one would notice the rewrite of his own history. Oh, right. We're not supposed to talk about that. But Megyn Kelly did, and she didn't just bring it up. She gift-wrapped it with commentary sharp enough to peel the paint off a Tesla. She pointed out how Kimmel's lofty display of moral superiority was as counterfeit as a rented pony from a studio prop room. The very man who once built his career by publicly humiliating people now appears on air, wringing his hands about civility. It wasn't merely a takedown. It was a full-blown expose, laced with blistering punchlines. Then came the convergence. Greg Gutfeld, still calmly sipping bourbon flavored with sarcasm and spite, lobbed another devastating remark.
Experiencing deep mental pain. And it's not just them. Journalists are now offering tips to deal with their disappointment, frustration, even fear. And that's normal after any loss. I'm still mad losing world's sexiest man to Johnny Depp. But why would people feel fear? Maybe because their only news sources are constantly telling them Trump's going to turn America into Nazi Germany. But you know who felt actual fear in the Biden administration? People who had to ride the subway.
How does a man lose his edge so completely that he's become nothing more than a political slogan in skinny jeans? Kelly, in perfect sync, produced yet another dusty clip from Kimmel's archive of hypocrisy, right at the moment when late-night television seemed primed to get even more self-righteous. There was Jimmy Kimmel, delivering another quivering monologue that sounded less like comedy and more like a diary entry written during a power outage, while Greg Gutfeld, the Fox of Snark, armed with his microphone and enough sarcasm to sterilize a room, took no prisoners. Gutfeld didn't simply call out Kimmel's new therapy hour for disgruntled MSNBC refugees. He dismantled it as if it were a piece of IKEA furniture assembled by a tipsy raccoon. According to Gutfeld, Kimmel's transformation from a bona fide funny man to an emotional support pundit isn't evolution, it's a mutation. This isn't comedy, he insisted. It's performance anxiety masquerading as political commentary. 1 minute, Kimmel is joking about Trump. The next, he's on the verge of sobbing into a decorative pillow while reciting polling data. It's essentially a TED Talk with punchlines, a far cry from the man who once reveled in making others the butt of his jokes. Comedy loses its edge when you have to clap after every joke just to prove it's not a tantrum. In other words, Kimmel's laugh track has been replaced by moral applause from an audience so eager to feel enlightened they'd probably cheer a weather forecast if it included a jab at Republicans. Greg Gutfeld doesn't just roast Kimmel's material, he incinerates the whole concept. Watching Jimmy Now, Gutfeld jokes, is like watching your guidance counselor attempt stand-up, awkward, sweaty, and pleading for you to care about climate change while fumbling a joke about the GOP. Megyn Kelly kept her tone cool and her facts nuclear, while Jimmy kept talking into a mirror that only reflected back the parts he wanted to see. No punchline needed, because when two seasoned media veterans dismantle a comedic career this thoroughly, the joke isn't just on you. It is you.